Lots to talk about this week with Ghost Punch Games recruiter, public speaker, and Moms in Gaming founder Christina Drake. Let's go! Hey everybody, welcome back. Game Industry Job Hunt episode 4. I'm really excited about this one. Today we are talking with my friend Christina Drake. She is a recruiter at Ghost Punch Games and among many other things. And I'm excited to dive into the conversation with her here in just a second. Before we do, please leave a review of the show on whatever platform you're listening to it on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever the case may be. Those reviews do a lot to help the show grow, and so we want to make sure to get as many of those as we can. I think that's about it. So hey, let's jump into the conversation with Christina Drake from Ghost Punch Games. Christina Drake is a leading voice in the games industry when it comes to all things job hunting. She's a working mom, an award-nominated and leading games recruiter and HR generalist with nearly a decade of experience, the founder of Moms in Gaming, a Women in Gaming ambassador, and finally, a Taco Bell connoisseur, which I have to hear more about. Christina, welcome to the show. And my first question for you is, how do you find the time?
I time block obsessively. I have really
Okay.
bad OCD, so if you saw my calendar, it would probably give you culture shock a little bit. It is color coded. It is booked out literally until next year. Just yesterday, I messaged my hairstylist and I said, "Hey, I know we have a pending appointment on April 11th, but can we move it to the 18th?" And she was like, "Only you
Sure.
have appointments you know you're moving 7 months from now."
That's
Um,
amazing.
so yeah, the answer is I time block obsessively.
I could probably take a lot of lessons from you in that just alone. We could probably do a whole episode there because I bleed ADHD out of my ears. So all it takes for me is just, oh, squirrel, oh, piece of candy, and then I'm gone. So I'm just everything happening all at once.
My husband has really bad ADD and ADHD, and it's actually very interesting to live in a house with someone who has like obsessive compulsive and then ADHD because
Yeah,
there are so many ways in which those skill sets are very complementary.
absolutely.
He's much more chill, he's much more easygoing. I have the ability to be a little bit more like controlling, micromanagerial, structured. But then there are things that drive me crazy. Like he's much more messy than I am, for example. So
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's
what is
a
this
little bit of
box
a
of
side
junk?
effect.
Right. What is this box of junk?
I'm telling you, funny enough, when you're talking about your spouse having ADHD, my wife a few months ago was having a conversation with her therapist and it came up and she's probably, complaining about something I'd done,
Sure.
totally understandably. And her therapist said something to the effect of, you kind of have ADHD type symptoms too. And so they kind of dug into it and then she
Mm,
kind of comes out and is like, I have ADHD, I think. And I'm like, welcome to the club, so it's
sure.
really funny.
Sure. Yeah. So time blocking, and then honestly, like I multitask as much as possible. So frequently I make my husband drive so that I could be doing something while I'm like doing something from my phone. I do think kind of the advances in technology allow us to kind of take our work with us.
Oh,
So
yeah, definitely.
that's really great. I was actually at the D and I was at a D&D table this weekend and I was doing something and one of my players the players next to me was like, "Get off your phone, like be with us." I was like, "You guys are taking forever on your turn. What else am I
Seriously.
gonna do while you decide if you're
Yeah.
gonna hit or not?"
I'm
So
rolling I'm rolling initiative on social media skill here.
yeah,
Leave me alone.
yeah,
So there, obviously there's a lot, we've just been on the call here before we started recording a few minutes and just instantly chatting about everything. And I could sit here and talk to you about everything all day, I'm sure. And I want to get to as much as we can in the short time we
sure.
have. But to start off, give us an idea of your background and sort of how you ended up in all these different things that you're doing: games recruiting, women in gaming, moms in gaming, or women in games, moms in gaming, everything. Give us kind of the backstory.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a snowball effect. I knew early on in college actually that I wanted to have a career that allowed me to, and I quote, be paid to be friends with people. I told people, what's your job? And I was like, I just want to get paid to be friends with people and make their dreams come true. Like that's what I want to do. So I didn't know what that looked like. And so I originally wanted to be in the music industry. And my internship was at the Vans Warp Tour, the largest rock and roll tour at the time in the nation. I really wanted to go in the to artist management and booking. I was like, I'm going to be a booking agent. When the music industry went digital, that kind of collapsed. I had to kind of pivot. I found my first job in biodiesel of all places. I worked for some fantastic women there. They unfortunately ended up having mass layoffs. I got laid off. I didn't know what to do. So I knew following that HR track and that recruiting track was something I wanted to pursue. And so I did that into industries I was interested in. So I went into higher education. And then I went and a friend of mine was like, hey, I'm starting this pop culture Etsy store. You love all things nerd culture. Do you want to kind of start consulting and doing this Etsy thing with me? And then I took that Etsy business from an Etsy store into a multi-billion-dollar business. We did big red carpet events with Lucas, Star Wars. And at the time, I met my spouse who was in games. He's like, you love games. Why aren't you doing this in games? And I said, because the games market's volatile. I don't want to run the risk of being laid off. I like the stability of my job right now. It had a lot of flexibility. I worked from home. I got to work really autonomously. I liked those aspects. And he said, well, why don't you just try it out? So I joined the International Game Developers Association as a secretary. So I was volunteering my time in games, then working full time. And then I started through just my connections at Lucas and Disney and Pixar, started picking up a couple of small contracts. And then that ultimately led to me staffing an entire indie studio. My husband was like, you should do this full time and stop, messing around. I kind of reached the peak of my that position in the fashion industry, and I had been really pigeonholed into back end HR. And I thought, you know what, now is the time to just like see what's out there, see what I can do. And I ended up landing my job at Naughty Dog. So I went straight into, AAA from doing these contract gigs and from volunteering, and then was caught up in math layoffs there, unfortunately, and then ended up where I am now at Ghost Punch, who was just acquired by PTW.
That's awesome. I feel like because I have a similar sort of background as far as just starting out in AAA, which is really weird, and I'm not really. It's interesting that you did too, because I sometimes wonder how unusual that is. I mean, I guess it's different for everybody, but yeah, same with me, and it felt really weird coming from, funny enough, a music background myself to now all of a sudden working at a big game studio. Just very very big culture shock just in
Yeah.
terms of wow, is this really happening? It was
Yeah.
just crazy. But we've been acquainted for a couple months now on LinkedIn, and as soon as we sort of met there, I immediately noticed that you were posting a lot of really good, really useful stuff. And so as I was sort of beginning to plan out the show, actually I quickly added you to the list of people that I wanted to have on.
Thank you.
So I'm really glad that I was able to get you on here so soon. That's great. But there were a couple of things that you posted around that time that jumped out to me right away. And so one was a post where you were detailing some scams that people should be on the lookout for. And so I want to dig in. I want to dig into that a little bit with you in a second. But also, you posted something that I think was equally important, which was some pretty serious data around your job search. As you know, as someone who is currently on the hunt myself, I found that, inspiring in a big way, and also encouraging, just the fact that, you were able to, do that and track that so closely. So talk a little bit about that. Like, what was that process like? How did you decide to do that? How did you track that so closely? And, give me
Yeah,
some
so
background there on that.
totally, totally. So a lot of this came out through my layoff. So I got laid off in March. When I had been laid off, I already had a pretty decent LinkedIn following at this point. I had been, part of Women in Gaming, and I had become sort of this like leading industry voice for females. And I had started leaning into the fact that I was a mom. I had my second baby when I was at Naughty Dog. So I felt like a lot of my followers kind of were on that journey with me. And it only felt right after all the support of my layoff post and all the work that, I had put in with Amir Satfad and other people in the industry who were really uplifting people impacted by the layoffs starting in 2023. It only felt right to share this with them as well. And so I am someone who, again, is pretty obsessive compulsive. I love data. I love being able to support my chaotic ideologies with data, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just Christina is saying this, there is some data point to go along with it.
Just trust me. Trust me.
Right, right, right.
All
I'm
right.
like, trust me, but also here's all the
Yeah.
data. Just today, I actually was running some numbers with my boss, and I was just like, hey, like here's the actual cost per use of us utilizing the spreadsheet. And she's like, this is so much like data for whether or not we should use a spreadsheet. And I'm like, I know, but so that's part of it, right? Is I garner value and I appreciate one of my top strengths is achievement. So I value achievement, and part of that comes with data and metrics. So I knew early on I wanted data and metrics. A really good friend of mine who's a producer named Jess. had actually put together an amazing data chart for her own job search. She's a producer and she was like, hey, I think that you would find a lot of value in this to represent your data search visually. So I knew that I wanted to do that. I track all of my job leads through Trello. So for me, I make a Trello board. I did an entire LinkedIn Live about it. I make a Trello board. I track all my leads. I copy the job descriptions onto there. I know who I talked to. So it's pretty in depth. And then I move the cards along accordingly, the pipeline as my job search progresses. So I could tell if I was just arbitrarily shooting out a resume because it made me feel good and I may or may not be qualified for that role, which is a nice dopamine hit, makes me feel accomplished, but may not be the best fit long term. Or if I was actually waiting, investing in a relationship, and then able to apply that relationship to a potential job opening. So two kind of different approaches there. So I knew that one of them was a little bit more machine gun style approaching of just like, let me put my resume out there and see what catches. And the other one is a little bit more pointed, a little bit more what I call like a snipe approach, in which you're really sniping towards a particular role. So because of that, I was able to kind of track all that data and then I put it into a funnel system so people could visually see what that funnel looked like and what those conversion rates are. So even in my own practice as a recruiter, I frequently track what my fallout rates are, what my pass-through rates are, and those are rates in which my candidates, if I have 100 candidates, how many of them, what percentage of them are converting through the various stages. So I do that pretty naturally in my day-to-day work. So doing it with my own search was natural for me, and I don't expect everyone to do that. But I do think it does create a better picture. And there are a couple of caveats with my story specifically that I think people need to take in mind. Right now in the industry, the average time to fill or the average time to get hired is sitting right around 10 and a half months, when in the past it was typically 3 to 6. I found my job now through my network at 4 months, and I recognize that not everyone has a LinkedIn following of 60,000 people to lean on. They haven't necessarily been cultivating relationships for 5 or 6 years. They don't have that rapport, that build. So it is a little bit more difficult. But what I wanted to highlight in those posts was really approaches one can take in order to better position themselves for those opportunities and what the actual conversions rate look in a best case scenario, right? Best case scenario, I have a very large following. I have a very significant amount of like good karma put out in the world. During my layoff, even though I was laid off, I opened up my calendar and I took individual donation-based one-on-ones. And I took between 16 and 25 of those a week. So more than half of my 40 hours a week was spent with those one-on-ones. So those types of things helped foster relationships. And the more and more people started to see the benefit from those, the more and more they were likely inclined to say, hey, thanks for interviewing me for this producer role. I see you have a recruiter role open. Do you know Christina? And that kind of opened the door for conversation that otherwise wouldn't have come through. And I wanted people to be able to visually see how all of that worked.
Yeah.
So,
It's funny in the few conversations I've had now since I started the show, obviously networking comes up a lot and I couldn't agree more with you. I think it's so crucial. I mean, I had a similar approach and some similar thinking around the same time. And I think I may have told you this on a LinkedIn message, but, talking about the snipe versus spray idea, I was doing the same thing. I was sort of spraying and, oh, hey, community manager, social media manager, anything related to that, apply. And it was sort of for me about, I guess now that you mention it, that dopamine hit of knowing I'm progressing because I have 20 applications out in the wild. But right around the same time that we met, I was thinking, I wonder if I should start focusing more on, roles that are really, really right for me, and then putting the rest of that energy into networking to try to make those roles happen. And that is such a superior strategy. It's so much better. I've seen much better results, more interviews, more contacts, things like that.
and I think it's a delicate balance, right? You can't only focus on nurturing one connection or one lead, but you also can't realistically be nurturing 1,000 leads, right? So I think that there is some balance of, okay, I'm going to apply to X number of jobs because I need to put my resume out there, and there is a shortage of jobs right now, and there's an overwhelming number of candidates on the market. But also for those leads that I really care about, ones that I can lean on, people I know to network with, I can also nurture those. And those maybe are my top 10 jobs. And as those fall out or as those get filled or as those work or don't work, what have you, you can move them in. I think of it a little bit like a baseball roster, right? Like you have 9 players on the field. If your first baseman gets injured, you need to have someone on the bench warmed up to be able to fill that spot. And that's kind of how I looked at all of these job leads. But at the same time, I knew that there were thousands of potential uh, players that could be in contact with, even if they weren't the right fit. And something that I did too is very early on in my layoff, I sat down and I said, okay, I have X amount of runway and I know that I can search for game specific industry jobs for the next 3 months. Right. The average length of time for a job search is 6 to 8 weeks. That's probably a little bit longer now that recruiters are inundated. So I would say 8 to 12. So I knew if I get my apps in right now, if I foster these connections, I'm looking at potentially 12 weeks to hire. So I knew, okay, I have to have all of my game industry jobs locked and loaded for 12 weeks. And at that 12-week mark, that 4 month mark, I need to start diversifying what industries I'm willing to look at. So for me, again, that went back to higher education, music, fashion, entertainment, so TV, film. After those industries, it was like big tech, which again is also impacted right now. So not the best move, but big tech. And then after that, kind of generic finance. And after that, widespread, I would take any job available because I have to feed my kids and keep a roof over my head. And my husband, who is also impacted by layoffs, was something that I needed to be able to take care of. It's like we now went from two incomes to one income. We had already kind of done the prep work and accommodations for that to keep afloat. Now, how do we either reduce expenses or increase revenue? And then how do we do that in a way, progressively that means that we can keep a roof over our head? It's like we have to take whatever jobs we can get. So I kind of built out that runway for myself. And even if it wasn't exact, I didn't say like, okay, on October 2nd, I have to do this. But I was like, I know I have about 3 or 4 months. And then if any other job leads come through, like the one at Ghost Punch did, then I can start to foster and build that in and see how that goes. And I was very, very fortunate in that my onboarding and hiring process with Ghost Punch was very, very fast. That was a very expedited process by comparison. It was like a 2 week process.
Oh, that's
Um,
amazing.
so it was really, really great. But
Yeah.
I know that's pretty atypical, right?
Yeah.
That's one of those like sunshine, the cosmic aligning
Blue
stories.
sky, completely blue sky. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've only had that for myself for candidates. Like I tell people all the time, I've only had that for three candidates that were not expecting a role that I cherry picked. One of them was from Instagram. I was like, hey, you're an amazing concept artist from Instagram. I pulled her up. So one of them was like a recruiting coordinator that was working at like a restaurant that I was like, hey, you should apply to this and then chat with me. So some of those connections do happen, but it's very few and far between. That's like the top 0.001%, of those like cosmic alignment, right time, stroke of luck kind of magic instances, magic miracles.
Yeah. You bring up two really interesting words that I think we should highlight here. And one is fostering and the other is nurturing. And in relation to relationships, those are both so important because nobody wants to be that person that only reaches out when they need something. Number one, and number two, if you are fostering those relationships that you have with your network, you may learn of something new proactively, without having to see the job post or without having to hear about it secondhand later. So that's something, that I've always tried to do is, in fact, I did some of that today, just reaching out to anybody that crossed my mind. Oh, hey, I haven't talked to this person in a while. Shot him a LinkedIn message. Hey, just checking in, whatever. I think doing things like that are really helpful and important, not just in a job search, but just in general, making sure that you are available to people and that they can tell that you want to have a relationship with them and you're not just kind of a hanger on that's sort of hanging around for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I do think too, there are things that people can do now. Like again, you may not have the same vast network that I do, or you may not have had like AAA experience, right, to lean on. But there are things you can do now, and it's hard because some of this does require a little bit of time, but there are things you can be doing on LinkedIn, actively connecting, actively commenting, actively seeking out people, and really engaging with them so that when it does come time for me to think of a producer or a cinematics artist or a VFX artist, I like as I'm naming these, I'm thinking of actual people from my LinkedIn network, but I know
Absolutely.
who those top three people are, and I want your name to be top of mind. So if there's something that does come up, I want to be like, oh yes, like I know Joe for that. It happened on this call, right? I was like,
Yeah.
oh, you're still looking. Let me
It
send you a lead,
No,
right?
guys, it literally happened before we hit
It
record. She
did.
said, "Oh, hey, actually, by the way, let me send you this." Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, great. So, yeah.
Yeah. So like we want that success to be happening, but with 60,000 people, I can't know. I can't know every single person. So the more connection you build, the more rapport you build with me, with my network, the more active I see you being on LinkedIn, the easier it is. And people think, oh, I have to create the same level of content. You absolutely don't. You absolutely don't. You can just engage with content, give thoughtful, meaningful discussions, be an active participant.
Absolutely.
And that will help me remember. If you're someone who's focused on communications, like I can see your communication style, I can see how you adapt to different discussions, how you handle maybe difficult or polarizing topics. And those things are things that are memorable to me. And those are things that I would then want to pass on to other leads in my network.
You mentioned you don't have to create content and things like that in order to start making an impression on your network and building your network and things like that. I think that's really true. And so as we're talking about sort of, just being involved in the comments, just engaging the things that you're seeing, being a part of that sort of community, if you will, I've found in my experience many times that actually inspires content for me. There are lots of social media voices and community voices that I follow on LinkedIn, and they may make a point about a certain thing, and then all of a sudden it inspires me to write a blog post about that thing, but with my thoughts on it. And then all of a sudden that's content, right? So to your point, I think if you're, staying engaged as far as reading everything you can, commenting on things in relevant ways, good things will happen. And it may have the side effect of also, inspiring your own individual content as well.
Yeah. And there are things you can do too. I mean, like, let's just say you're someone who's like, hey, I'm not super active on LinkedIn, but there's an International Game Developers Association network near me, or there's a meetup, or there's a Discord server, or, right? There are small pockets of community you can get involved with. Lightbox is coming up here in California. They have a pretty extensive network and Discord channel. There's sub channels for Unreal engineers and sub channels for animators and VFX artists and women in animation. There's so many subgroups you can get involved in to start on like a more micro scale.
Mm-hmm.
The downside is you do need time to invest that. I always say, like, you want to create rapport with your connections before you need them. It's a lot
Exactly.
harder,
Exactly.
right, to come into a blank situation and say, hey, Joe, I've never met you, but can you do me a favor? That's a much harder sell than, hey, I've known you for a few months. I've seen you've really been active on LinkedIn. I saw your resume. I think here's a role that might be a good fit for
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And unfortunately, I mean, I've learned that both ways. I mean, sometimes you get, I've had moments even just during this job search where a great opportunity comes up and I have to sort of say, okay, I don't really know this person, but I'm going to just take a shot and I'm going to reach out and just see what happens. And you always think, well, you never know, shoot your shot. But more times than not, if you haven't fostered that relationship, unless they're just exceptionally kind, and I'm not saying people that don't respond to those, by the way, that they're not exceptionally kind. I'm just saying, unless they're going way out of their way to help just for no reason, they're probably not going to respond. And that just gets back to, again, nurturing those relationships when you don't need that person,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that, they understand that you value that relationship and you want it to grow, and all that is super, super important.
I think one thing that I do a lot that is helpful is I'll randomly just pick three people and I'll shoot them a message and I'll just say, hey, Joe, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your day going today? And you'll say, oh, it's a 5. And I'll say, okay, what can I do to make it a 6? Right? Super small, super simple. Sometimes they're like, oh, I could really use a job lead, or I could really use an introduction, or I could really just use a funny meme,
Yeah.
right?
Or even just that message, just ask. Honestly, for me, like as you're saying that, what I'm thinking is, what I would say to you is, what, Christina, just this message puts me at a 6. Like, that's enough. I mean, even something that simple can
And
really
it is
help.
simple, right? And I do think, like, in terms of, as we were talking about, like in terms of asking too and shooting messages, I will say one thing that is very, very hard for me is I, in the past, really committed myself to answering every single LinkedIn message that I ever received. I average about 100 of them a day. And as a result, I'm consistently 2 weeks behind. So please, like, have patience with those instances, and definitely, fostering a connection is much better, because sometimes people will just shoot me a message and say, hey, here's my resume. Do you have a job for me? And my immediate reaction is look at the website and then come back to me when you know I have a role open, right? Because in that point, it's just a little bit difficult to again make that justification, right?
Yeah. You gotta filter everything through the open roles. So really quick, I do want to circle back around to something we mentioned a few minutes ago. The post that I talked about where you were mentioning scams and common stuff to avoid, things like that. As you know, I'm trying to build this podcast based on awesome, actionable information people can use. I think that'd be a great one here in the early stages of the show, sort of establishing what are some scams that people need to be on the lookout for? What's something you're seeing recently? Is there anything you're seeing recently that's sort of pervasive on LinkedIn or just online in general? What are you seeing right now?
So there's a lot. I did a whole LinkedIn series about this, so it's a lot of content to fit into a couple of sentences. Basically, things I would say to look out for. One, anytime a recruiter reaches out to you with the intent of meeting on an unsecured platform, if they want to meet with you via WhatsApp, if they want to meet with you via Zoom and there's no video, if they're expediting a process with no context, if it's a company you've never heard of before, something that's hard to research, right? Those are all things that I think are immediate red flags. There are also things I would say that are some scam things just to be mindful of. If you're noticing that there's like a lot of job postings and not a lot of activity, or not a lot of feedback, or you can't find any people or information on that role, those are things to be on the lookout for. There are a lot of posts that sometimes, as you kind of get deeper in the process, they'll ask you things like, hey, why don't you send me your bank account and routing information and let me know, what your address is, and I'll go ahead and ship you your equipment. And then they'll say, hey, why don't you let me know, buy the equipment, let me know how much it is, and then I'll send you a check, right, to reimburse you for that. Those are all things that are pretty atypical. Not to say that they don't happen. There may be super unique instances where maybe you're working for a startup. It's one of two people. They've got a finite number of skills. But even then, I would suggest that they purchase the software or the platform or the machine you need and then have it shipped to you. I think it's really difficult because there's so many things out there that range from something as micro small as trying to get, computer passwords of like, hey, sign up for this arbitrary unknown website that they've now collected password data that they've skimmed from you. So always like checking your web browser and making sure that it says, you know, typically there's some formatting of like the ATS system that they're using, like Workable or Greenhouse or Workday or Bamboo HR. There's some variation of that,
Mm-hmm.
usually a company name.com. Sometimes you'll see that it does take you to a different site. So right now we're dealing with that. PTW just acquired Ghost Punch. Some people are going to the Ghost Punch page and saying, hey, I didn't really see this role that you're advertising, but it's advertised on this other page. And I say, yes, that's because we are in a merger and we're now moving all of our items to a new system. So yes, that is actuality, but people will check with me, and there should be no shame in you being able to check with a recruiter or an employee at the company. If you know them, you can comment on their LinkedIn page and say, hey, I saw an opening for this role. Is it legit? If you're starting to see some really abstract third-party sites, they're not like your common like Hitmarker, Game Jobs US, things like that. Those are again things to be on the lookout for. But yeah, anytime you're asked to like sign up for something that is a little bit fishy seeming,
Just the
even though it
spidey
seems
sense,
legit,
right?
just
Just
yeah, like
following
check
the spidey
in.
sense means everything. Yeah. If you see a red flag, it's probably for a reason. Where there's smoke, there's fire, all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So we got a couple minutes left here to finish things off. The past few episodes that I've done now, I've been asking everybody this sort of two-part question, and so I think I'm going to continue it going forward just because it's good information. What is your ultimate piece of job hunting advice? And conversely, what is a common mistake you see people making in their job hunt that they should avoid?
Okay, I'll start with the mistake first. A common mistake is trying to lean too heavily on quick fixes in their resume and not focusing on maintaining a boring ATS friendly resume, I think is number one. I recently I teach undergrad also. There's like nothing I don't do. I teach an undergraduate course at Laguna College of Art and Design. I purchased a package of resume templates from a very prolific recruiter, not a recruiter in the game space, just like a generic contract recruiter. There's $50, $50 pack of 10 resumes. Majority of them are bad, right? They have a lot of color blocking, a lot of boxes. The Cornell style, which is like two columns, is harder to follow for a recruiter. And we walked through it in my class, and my class was stunned at how many mistakes you can see in an effort to stand out. I would say boring resume is better. Boring is best. Maintain a very boring resume in terms of formatting that is full of rich content. That's what I would suggest. So, and then if you're noticing, hey, I'm not getting any callbacks, it's likely a resume error, right? If you're not getting any callbacks, it is likely a resume error. So, how do we better position your resume to make you a stronger candidate? So, first things first, I see people doing wrong is having an ill formatted or resume that's full of quick tips and tricks or almost like gimmicks, right, to
Mm,
try to stand out
interesting.
is probably number one. The second thing in terms of what you can do better, have a strong personal brand and have a strong network. And that network, and I say is strong, does not need to be large, right? It needs to be strong. And there's a difference there. So you could have a small network of 20 or 30 people. Like I started my LinkedIn with 10 connections, right? Two of them were in games, and one of them was my husband and his best friend. That's where I started,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
everybody starts somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be large. It is okay to have a smaller network so long it is strong. And strong is people who will give you hard advice, people who will keep you top of mind, people who will push you to improve, people who will engage with you, and people who will make introductions to other people.
That's amazing. I mean, look, I think the theme for me, the resounding theme of this episode has been nurture and foster those relationships because you never know when you're going to need them, and they're great to have for a lot of different reasons. So make sure to do that. It's a good thing to do, right?
Absolutely.
Christina, thank you again so much. I really appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
This has been great. I have to get you back on again really soon.
Please.
And we'll dig into some more of this because I honestly think I could sit here and talk to you all day. No
Oh,
problem.
thank
So,
you.
anyway,
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I appreciate it.
thanks a lot.
Talk to you later.
All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this episode of the Game Industry Job Hunt Podcast. Once again, big thanks to my guest, Christina Drake. Make sure to follow her over on LinkedIn. Visit GameIndustryJobHunt.com for resources, links to social, show notes, all kinds of fun stuff. And finally, again, please leave the show a review on your podcast app of choice. If you're getting some value here, let's try to grow this thing. Let's grow this community and share the show so that friends can benefit from it, and we can spread this information as far as possible and help as many people as we can. So really appreciate that. In the meantime, have a good one, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.